Hi ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're here for episode 20 of the Isle of Man Sport podcast, and today's guest is Mr. Juan Corlett. And welcome, Juan, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Trev, yeah.
Excellent. So today Juan's going to talk to us about a topic that's been quite prominent in the press lately, and especially with things that have been taking place with COVID. We're going to be looking at fatigue-based sort of illnesses and how that can affect people, especially in young sports people as well, where quite often we think we're young and invincible, but things like this can have quite a profound impact on people's lives. So, Juan, I suppose best place to start is with your own experiences, really. What sort of happened to you, and when did things sort of start to come about?
Yeah, so going back to the start, when I was 23, 9 years ago now, I contracted Epstein-Barr virus, which is also known as glandular fever, and I was active at the time. Hockey was my main sport. Work was going well. I'm an accountant. I just qualified, just finished my exams, which was a huge relief, and career was going well, and the virus knocked me down for, I can't remember exactly, it was 3 or 4 weeks. A couple of weeks was pretty nasty, and then I gradually got better, and after about 4 weeks I returned to work, and that was reasonably successful. Was back in work full time with the occasional day off for about 3 or 4 months. So at the time it was frustrating, because although I was back in work, I wasn't able to go back and do the exercise or the sporting activity that I really enjoyed. So there was something missing from my life, and there was frustration, impatience, wanting to get back to where I was before, and it then got worse. So I'd been very patient. I didn't go back. I didn't do any sort of running that I'd previously done before. Didn't play any hockey. I don't think I really picked up a stick in that 3 or 4 month period. But come May, so I picked up the virus in January. Come May, I had a significant setback, and then then it took over 6 months to get back to work even. My health deteriorated, got significantly worse in the short term, June, July time of that year, and it was the beginning of 2013 before life became a bit more normal again. Crikey,
so it's really knocked you for 6.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. The initial period was sort of okay in that at least I could get back to work. And I was still socialising to some extent, although it was tricky because my energy levels weren't the same as what they've been before. So in big groups in particular, it was tiring. But then, it wasn't something I was prepared for. Life doesn't prepare you for having basically 12 months of ill health, and looking back with hindsight, I don't think I dealt with it brilliantly, but I was still only in my early 20s and not really equipped with the life skills.
Well, it's a time in your life where a lot of us, we do feel like we're invincible, and you're young, you're active, you've thrown yourself into sport, and you feel you can take on the world. And I suppose it's likening it to feeling like you're old before your time almost, and you expect to be having those sorts of feelings much later on in your life.
Yeah, I worried whether I was going to get better. I think so. In May, when I had the big setback, looking back, I shouldn't have returned to work full time. So I had a strategy that prioritised getting back to work and obviously earning a living, and doing that to the best of my ability, because I wanted to come across well to my employer. Looking back, I would be much better off going back part-time, doing what I was capable of, and giving myself a healthy work-life balance during my recovery. And that would have probably given me a little bit of access to light exercise, going for a walk at the weekend, or if I was, ever had a Wednesday afternoon off, then I'd have a bit of free space for things that I'd enjoy a bit more. And that would have been a kinder way of treating the initial stages. And instead, obviously, I prioritised work a bit. And when I tried to gently introduce exercise, I went for a couple of hour walk in the countryside, in the Manx countryside, and that felt like a gentle introduction for somebody who could run 6 or 7 miles without getting unduly worn out before I became ill. A gentle walk in the countryside felt like a natural introduction, but because I was working hard and taking myself near to my limit in everything else I was doing, I didn't have any capacity for exercise, however light it was, and to a lesser extent, I needed to introduce exercise even more gently. It needed to be half an hour walk along the prom with a flat surface, something really gentle, and that would have been the way of building things up more gently and doing it in a more measured way. But hindsight's wonderful, isn't it?
It is, it is. And it's all about, I suppose, managing load, isn't it? And stress being a load comes in different shapes and forms, doesn't it? It's not. Absolutely. It's not just physical exertion, isn't it? It can be the mental exertion from work, even socialising and being with people. Yeah. Emotional, exactly. So it's it then becomes, I suppose, it must be a bit of a minefield on where do you start in terms of trying to sort of fit all those different stresses and on your capacity, and how you can sort of balance that through a day or a week or a month or a year.
Exactly, and that is the nature of treatment for these fatigue-based conditions. How do you pace yourself, and how do you pace yourself across those different loads on your body? I don't think there's many in their early 20s, many teenagers who are really well skilled at managing those loads, and I think there's more, mature people who are more familiar with listening to their body and pacing themselves each day and each week, and probably partly because their energy levels are reducing and it's a necessity in life. And I guess illness brings out that necessity more for young people, and you have to work out each day what you're capable of across those different things, and don't hold yourself back from life. You need to still have engagement. You still need to have some social interaction. You still need to have some emotional connection. You still need to have a little bit of work or cognitive stuff, and you need a little bit of physical too. But you need to know where you're at any given point in your recovery and work to your limits and pace yourself. The recovery technique is called pacing.
Right, okay. Yeah. So in terms of your experience, what sort of how have you learned to manage things at the moment, and what sort of support mechanisms are there or isn't there out there for people?
Yeah, well, I guess we probably need to keep going forward with my story, because we left it there at the beginning of 2013, and life really returned to normal there. I can't, looking back, think of any obvious signals that there were any health issues, and for about 18 months or so, I would say I was pretty close to full health, and I was playing hockey again, playing golf and cricket in the summer, and work was going well, working hard as well, able to work overtime when necessary, social life was back on track, and 18 months were good. Then in the summer of 2014, I had diagnosed by a physio a hip problem, which is quite common. I mean, I think across a variety of sports, but hockey players in particular, where you have to hinge over your hips, hip issues are common. So I had an operation on both hips. It was keyhole surgery in the UK, and that obviously tidied up the joint, and there were some other issues that had been triggered. And then inevitably I had a rehab period with the hip and my physical capabilities. And looking back with hindsight, maybe I made some of the same mistakes again in 2014 that I made in 2012, although in a different different context. So my priority was to get back into work again. And understandably, you need to make a living, and
Definitely.
a career is a big part of your life, and it's very difficult to put your career on pause. So as soon as I could, I was working from home in the first 3 weeks after the operation, and then I was back in work on crutches again when I was ready to. And I was seeing about 3 months in, I found a private physio locally, and he was a great help in the recovery over the next few years, and his expertise was invaluable. I had a little bit of difficulty getting the right advice when I went to Nobles. Obviously, I'd had a private operation in the UK because of the necessity, and then I didn't quite get the support in the initial 3 months from the physio services locally, for one reason or another. But once I found found the guy who I stuck with long term, I had all the advice and expertise I needed to manage the hip, and we came up with a sensible rehab program. And by this stage, I was able to, I was 3 or 4 months in, able to cope with work, and it was really a case of over an extended period building up my physical robustness, and that went okay, and there was continual progress. So it was slow, and getting into 2015. So the operation was in 2014. There wasn't really anything I could do physically for a few months. It's just the nature of the operation.
Yeah.
Hips are, you'll know hips. They're a big part of the body, aren't they?
Absolutely. You've got a massive ball and socket joint there, which is doing a lot of work and taking a lot of weight, and is helping you get from A to B, basically.
You can't really move without your hip getting worked. So whatever state you're in, post-op, you're not going to be doing much. And then, in 2015, we started building things up. But I think it took about 9 months before I went for my first jog. I'd been doing a bit of walking before then in a measured way. And then I think in 2016, we'd sort of been building things up. At some point, I think it was around March or April 2016, I played a hockey match. It was a case of, we've been doing a lot of rehab over a long period of time. I've been building up my energy levels and my physical strength. I was like, let's just do it. Let's see what happens. What's the worst that can happen? And it went all right. I enjoyed the game. I was a bit achy towards the end of the game, and my back hurt a bit. And afterwards, understandably, the first time I played in over about 2 years, I was stiff for the next few days. But that's really, I guess, what you'd expect.
For sure, return to play in any sport. That first match back, not a lot prepares you to playing the game, other than playing the games. Quite often, is it?
Yeah.
You don't play to the same intensities often in training.
Exactly, yeah.
Especially in like multi-directional team-based sports where it's very chaotic and random. You don't know what sort of game it's going to be, do you?
Oh, it turned out to be a close game as well. I think it was 1-1 for a long time, and I think there was a winning goal in the second half, and it was probably not the ideal situation because I very much got carried away with it. But I really enjoyed it, and basically I felt like my hip held up well, and I had a baseline of physical fitness from the rehab we've been doing, and it was basically a success, really. And then I said to the captain that I didn't want to play the next weekend. Let's just take it easy. And I knew there was a bigger fixture coming up in 2 weeks. I think it would have been about 10 days after my first match. My first match was on a weeknight. I didn't want to play the following weekend, 3 or 4 days later, but 10 days later there was another match. It was a bigger fixture. So I'm up for that. Well, let's do that. That didn't go as well, which was hard to understand. 10 days post, exertion. There's no real reason in a normal body to see, lesser energy levels. I really struggled. Like in the warm up, I was struggling. I just didn't have, I felt heavy, and my touch wasn't there. My body felt heavy, but I just felt slow. And it's all right. Let's get into the game. I'll get going. And the game went okay, but it was tough. And the second half, I was an absolute passenger. You know, my body wasn't interested in taking part, and I think my mind was getting tired because of the physical tiredness. And yeah, I mean, I didn't really know what to make of it. It was frustrating. I didn't feel like it went very well. We didn't play as a team very well. So maybe I was thinking, well, I just didn't get into the game because of that. Well, looking back with hindsight, I know exactly what was going on there, and that was one of the first really obvious signs that I had this underlying fatigue illness, not a physical lack of fitness, but I had post-viral fatigue in 2012 following Epstein-Barr virus. And what I wasn't told at the time by the doctors, unfortunately, is that when you get a severe case of post-viral fatigue, which a lot of people are unfortunately experiencing with COVID at the moment, particularly if it's severe initially in those first 6 or 12 months, however well you recover, there's a chance that it can seep back into your system and start becoming an issue. And I think the hip operation allowed it to seep back into my system. That was as you say, that was a load which the body couldn't handle in different forms.
Surgery is a big trauma, isn't it, to deal with, you know, and a long-term one at that, with the recovery, as you explained as well.
Yeah, well, that was a big social drain, in fact. The fact I didn't play hockey and I was therefore out of the social loop for so long. So, you know, maybe that was a load on the body, or probably the minor factor compared to the physical side. And, you know, so the fatigue had leaked back into the system in a very mild way. So these fatigue-based illnesses work on a scale of 1 to 100. And if in 2012 I went down to 40 out of 100 with my health, and then I recovered gradually over 6 months to get back to 100. I got knocked off 100, and I was maybe put down by the hip operation to between 80 and 90, between 90 and 100, pretty near the top of the spectrum, and something that you're not going to recognise in your desk job, or to be honest, in most aspects of life, unless you try and take to the sports field and put your body under extra strain. And although I don't know all of the details of Cav's story, I think maybe Cav can relate to this part of the post-viral fatigue recovery, because for an athlete who's trying to put their body through a lot of load, you need to be 100%, don't you? In every sense. To
compete in performance sport at the highest level, yeah. Absolutely. Because, I mean, Cav and a number of other athletes have been quite notable in the press, haven't they, who've experienced different sorts of fatigue illnesses as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the press I've seen about Cav has been about Epstein-Barr virus, and I don't know the full details of his own experience, but he obviously took a while to build himself back up, and it does sound very much like viral recovery, viral fatigue, and that's it. You know, sports people are going to be picking up that, you know, that slight lacking in their capability. So if they've got post-viral fatigue, which is between 90 and 100 on that scale, they're going to find out when they compete. Maybe not even pick it up when they're training, but when they try and compete. And that's, you can't compare myself to Cav in terms of my athletic ability, but that's what I was picking up. I went back to my sport, and I suddenly worked out that I had limitations that I certainly didn't have as a teenager or in my early 20s. I mean, with hindsight, at least, that's what I've concluded. So then, from that point, I was conservative. You know, I think there was a realization that hockey wasn't something I was ready for, and through the next 12 months or so, I'd do the occasional run, and I went on a holiday or two, which involved, you know, physical activity, cycling and that sort of stuff. So when I wasn't in work, I actually had that extra energy maybe when I was on holiday to do a bit more physical activity. And my physical endurance continued to improve. My ability to go out for a run improved through 2016 and into 2017. I started picking up a hockey stick again and joined or took part in my club's third team. I've been playing first team, previously before I became ill, but I helped out with the juniors a little bit, did coaching and managing of one of the junior teams, and just casually sort of introduced myself to hockey pitch involvement by a lower level and a lower intensity. And that went well. The following year, so the start of 2018, my physical fitness got to the stage where I thought, let's go again. It's almost 4 years now since I'd had my hip op at the start of 2018. We've really patiently worked this, with the physio's help and careful monitoring of my exercise levels. A golf had become a bit easier, so I'd been trying desperately to work up to be able to do 18 holes, because I'd gone out and done 9 holes to begin with, and that was quite a stretch, and then gradually got it up to I could get to like the 12th or 13th. So that was building up in the background. That was actually a pretty good indicator of my increasing stamina. And yeah, at the start of 2018, it was like, right, let's pull the trigger. At some point with your physical conditioning, you've got to put your body out there, and that creates the added benefit, and you improve your fitness levels more quickly. So that's what we did, and it went well. I wasn't like I was in my early 20s, but I had a full men's season of the hockey there, where by the end of the year I could take part in a match, and particularly I'd say for the first half, fine, full fitness like it used to be, and I could recover, so I could play consecutive Saturdays, and then I was starting to get a bit tired in the second half, but to be honest, that's always what used to happen anyway. And there would be more fatigue than in my early 20s and teenage years. When I was at work, I'd definitely feel more achy, but then, I think I was around my 30th birthday, and maybe that's just something that comes with the territory.
Certainly happened to me when I was 30 when I was playing rugby.
So anyway, I kept plugging away, and things were going broadly pretty well. And then the hockey season finished, and over the course of the summer, I started regressing slightly. So where I'd been able to do 18 holes of golf, it started suddenly becoming a struggle to get through those final 3 or 4 holes. I remember a couple of rounds of golf in particular where I was like, where's this come from? We're going backwards suddenly. And I went on looking back with hindsight, I could probably think of 100 examples now of where there were warning signs, in that 4-year period. That's
the key thing to be able to identify, isn't it? What are them warning signs that you can sort of think, well, hang on, I need to take note here and perhaps change my approach.
Yeah, and you know what, I was recognising them at the time, and I was adjusting appropriately for most of that 4-year period. And that's, I think, why I've had so much success. I feel really proud of what I achieved in that 4-year period, because I had this illness that I didn't have diagnosed, and I still got to the stage where I could get back to the hockey pitch. And there's professional athletes who, even with their support system, like Robin Soderling was a high-profile tennis player, top 10 tennis player, about 10 years ago, and he ended up retiring through post-viral fatigue, and he couldn't get back to the training he needed to. And, I'd worked out on my own a system that had got me to the right place. But because I hadn't been diagnosed and I didn't know enough about how the mechanisms work with fatigue, I didn't know that I was running the risk of a big setback and a relapse. And making small adjustments in relation to a warning sign was fine in isolation, but obviously if I'd known at the time that I was running the risk of a big setback, I would have taken a different strategy, and a more cautious approach to those warning signs.
Crikey.
Because in the summer of 2018, I started getting some really big warning signs. So in work, I'm an accountant, and it's not as boring as maybe the stereotype makes out, and it can be quite stimulating. You might not convince you of that, but there's lots of clients demanding different things at different times. It can be stimulating, and I started finding my concentration weakening, and there'd been no point really in that previous 4 years where I'd had any issues at work. I'd always been able to work as hard as I wanted, but I was sitting down at my computer screen and trying to read, interpret some legal document, and I just couldn't concentrate more than about a paragraph when I was reading, which was pretty frustrating. It was pretty difficult to get the work done. It wasn't all the time, but yeah, I knew something was going on there. Couldn't get what I needed to achieved, and that, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 weeks before my big setback, I probably had the first of those at work, and they weren't every day. Some days were all right, and over about a 6-week period, we had this slight deterioration in my physical condition, like with the golf, and I started struggling to concentrate at work from time to time. And then one Monday morning, I went into work, and it felt like it did in 2012 when I was trying to return to work, or even when I wasn't able to work. I just couldn't. I couldn't function, and I knew it felt just like 2012, and it was pretty concerning. I was like, this is something I haven't experienced for 6 years. What on earth is going on? I picked up the phone to the doctor straight away, and actually, funnily enough, I'd had an appointment with a different physio about 3 weeks before that, and I sort of explained the previous 4 years. Yeah. I wanted a second opinion, and there was something I said to him. I said about struggling to walk home from work one day, and he said to me, "That's got nothing to do with your hip."
Yeah.
And so I thought any fatigue I'd had in that 4 year period was linked to the hip, because that was where the fatigue would generally originate.
Mm-hmm.
There'd be a hip ache and other muscular issues, but there would obviously be an underlying fatigue linked to it. So this other physio said, "I think you should make an appointment with your GP. And I don't think they'll be able to help." They're probably not going to be interested in the fact you've got a slight limitation on your physical fitness, but make an appointment with your GP and see what they say.
Yeah.
Which was good advice, and certainly, it was a bit of a light bulb moment for me. It was like, well, yeah, now he's mentioned it, maybe we should explore other medical routes. So this Monday morning, I picked up the phone to make an appointment with a GP, but I'd actually had another appointment scheduled in for the following week already. But I made an emergency appointment. I felt like this was pretty serious. And I went in, I think the next day, and I said, "Look, I think something's happening which is very similar to the viral issues I had in 2012, and there wasn't much really she could add. She just said, let's just say you've got another appointment next week. To be honest, by the time I'd had the appointment the following week, it was too late. I was already too far gone.
Crikey.
With this fatigue, the way in which fatigue develops. So back to that 1 to 100 scale, in the course of this 6 week period, but primarily over the course of a week or so, gone from 80 or 90, probably high 90s, to 40. And then obviously the GP wasn't really able to help that first appointment or the second appointment, or in the 3 or 4 appointments I had over the next 3 months. And I'd say in the month from that Monday where it all came crashing down, over the course of that next month, I probably went even further down from 40 to 20 on the scale, because I had no advice. I was worse than 2012 at this point. It was really struggling to function. I couldn't really drive. I couldn't cook for myself. Or exhausted all the time, struggling even to watch TV.
Crikey.
In a short period of time, I've gone from a really stimulating career, being able to return to the hockey pitch, playing 18 holes of golf, fairly comfortably, and over 6 weeks it had obviously built up. I'd overloaded the system and made 2 smaller adjustments, and obviously I had a hectic life, with social commitments as well at the time, and I had a holiday at the beginning of that period, which was probably a factor too. And it just went pop. It's just like popping a balloon, and it's not a gradual deterioration. It's not something you can catch. You are knocked off your feet. This is not something you're gonna just jump back up and a week later be fine. And it was just awful. Like I won't be able to convey just how awful it is to have your functions taken away from you. I was struggling to hold a conversation with my parents, but I struggled to drive there, and when I got there, I didn't have the energy. Never mind going for a walk. I couldn't speak to my mum, probably the person I speak to most comfortably.
And you've probably got so much you want to tell her as to how you're feeling and what you've been going through.
But it's scary because I didn't know what was happening. She didn't know what was happening, and the GP wasn't telling us what was happening. And it was just this devastating crisis. And I'm without the skills to talk about it. She doesn't know what's happening. I'm getting a bit emotional talking about it. Absolutely. That was easily the most traumatic period of my life, and I've had a couple of other things, and it's just the helplessness and the, you're just stranded because you can't talk to people clearly, what more than anything I want to try and convey is that this risk exists. So, come the end of 2018, I was an absolute write-off. I was pretty much useless to the human existence. And 2019 was even worse, because it's such an awful illness when you get down to that level on the spectrum. From 40 or 50 or 60, it's possible to recover. But some people don't recover. Like when you get down to I was probably maybe 15 on the spectrum,
Crikey.
15 or 20. It's so tough. Like some people will live with it for decades, because it's so difficult to manage the load on your body, because you can manage so little. How do you manage a load which is basically, humans aren't designed to, basically from the moment I was waking up in 2019, there was a period in the summer of 2019 where all I could do was wake up, eat and sleep. But you can't sleep in the day because you need your sleep at night. So I'm getting up in the morning and I know that I've got 15 hours ahead of me, and all I've got to look forward to is 3 meals. And you're just getting through, can't use your phone, can't watch TV, it's all too much, you can't talk to anybody. And I was just stuck in my flat, for 2 weeks it was like that. And then for 2 months there was a marginal improvement. I could watch 10 minutes of Friends. That was the thing I could do. Yeah. And I could just about hold a conversation, or I couldn't hold a conversation. I could communicate with my girlfriend, but it wasn't a conversation. I was getting one word sentences out. And as I said, if there's one thing I would want to convey, it's that if you're feeling post-viral fatigue or something similar, obviously particularly with the pandemic and COVID, realise that it can get worse and that you're in control of your destiny. And mine is an absolute horror story. It's in some ways a bit of a miracle that I've got out, and I've still got a long way to go to return to normal life. 6 months probably before I can return to work. But my horror story isn't isolated. There are lots of others on the Isle of Man alone who have severe ME, which is the long-term form of post-viral fatigue. There's some other causes of ME, but the most common cause of ME is a viral infection, which triggers this sort of fatigue. And most people, well, maybe I shouldn't say most, there are a number of people who have developed ME, chronic post-viral fatigue, who just wish they'd known before how to avoid it happening. And with COVID, there are going to be people walking around trying to return to work, trying to return to sport at the moment with a little bit of lingering fatigue, which is a nuisance. They need to be patient. They need to take it seriously.
That's a common thing. I mean, I know myself. If I'm ill, I want to try and get through that illness as quickly as I can, get back to work as quickly as I can, and get back to doing sport or physical activity or whatever it is as quickly as I can, because you want to just get back to normal. And it's almost like the sort of default reaction for a lot of people, isn't it?
I think that's natural. I mean, we grow up with colds and viral infections you pick up at school or whatever, and you spend a couple of days in bed or on the sofa and your parents look after you, and you go back to school after a few days. And then in adult life, a week off work is quite a long time. In the normal course of things. Obviously, if we have a more drastic diagnosis, cancers or other severe illnesses, then the dynamic changes. But for viruses, we're programmed that it's quite a short recovery period. And that habit is obviously dangerous if you're dealing with something which is particularly nasty, and it's not just getting over the initial infection. You've got this sort of lingering fatigue in your system, which can be more than just the specific reaction to the virus. The trauma your body goes through with the virus can, in different people, cause other underlying loads on the body, and those need patient management to get back up to full speed. And one of the other scary things with these illnesses is what they're finding in the UK. So the head of the UK long COVID task force, so long COVID is a term I think we're all familiar with now, those who are showing symptoms for months after they experience their initial positive test. The head of the long COVID task force in the UK did a BBC interview a couple of months ago, quite deliberately, to highlight that they're finding very clear, correlation between people who were young, active, and didn't have a serious bout of COVID. They weren't hospitalised. They may have been off work, but they had a relatively mild experience of it. That they're finding a high correlation between those people and those who are developing the most severe long-term version of chronic debilitating fatigue. And that's, I think, coming back to my story, because those young, active, people who are trying to brush off the illness are those who are getting back to normal very quickly, and maybe too soon, and maybe going back to the hockey pitch or the football pitch or whatever their sport is, and they're rushing it. And I'm sat here talking about my story, but this guy's in charge of the UK's long COVID response, and he's saying these people need to be aware of it. And I think, as a sporting community in the Isle of Man, we need to take that advice on board, don't we?
Oh, for sure. I mean, we're in uncharted territories, I suppose, aren't we? We're dealing with a pandemic, and it's we're experiencing lots of people coming down with the Isle of Man's very slightly different. We've been able to shut our borders, arguably probably not had as high incidence as other areas in the UK, but that's not to say that couldn't change either.
Yeah, well,
and those few people who have experienced it, you know, it's important that they're able to get good information and be a little bit more aware of some of the potential dangers.
Absolutely, and the numbers are still significant even in the Isle of Man, because we've had over 1,000, haven't we, in the last couple of months, positive cases, and we weren't doing as much testing this time last year.
That's true.
But you could say maybe we had around 1,000 as well in that initial wave. And long COVID is commonly talked about as a 10% factor. So of the positive tests, about 10% will have long COVID of some severity. That's a couple hundred people potentially on the Isle of Man. Yeah. And those who are managing it still in quite a drastic way 6 months later, I don't have the exact figures, but it's still appreciable. It could easily be 50 people with really severe fatigue. And I guess it's a new thing, isn't it, dealing with a pandemic, and it's a new thing dealing with COVID, and long COVID is a new term. And I guess the best we can do is learn from our experiences of similar people who've gone through similar experiences, similar viruses, and post-viral fatigue isn't a new concept.
No.
And the more we can learn from, famous athletes who have gone through post-viral fatigue and the recovery methods they use. I mean, just to name drop, we've obviously said Cav, Robin Soderling, but Max Whitlock, the gymnast, is another one. Heather Watson, another tennis player. Roger Black, who won an Olympic medal about 30 years ago. Ian Woosnam.
I was reading his story this morning. Woosy's one, it looked quite worrying. He was really struggling, wasn't he?
But he competed in the Masters last month, so it's very much possible to recover. And I went on for a bit about my horror story, but the positive thing about these recoveries is that you are empowered to recover. You should feel that you have control over your recovery, and there should be a positive outlook. You need to be aware that there's a risk if you go too hard too soon, but if you take control, particularly in those early months when the opportunity is greatest to make a good recovery, then you're looking at positive outcomes. I mean, Cav, look at his results last week.
He's been flying in Turkey, hasn't he?
Yeah. And there's probably other things that have come together to contribute to that victory than just his recovery from Epstein-Barr virus. But that shows that people can have a nasty version of these sort of viruses, and the outcome can be positive. But you need a bit of patience, to say the least.
Definitely, patience and good advice and help and support as well. Yeah. So what are the next steps for you doing?
Next steps for me, well, I guess once we finish this, I'll go and have a rest at home.
I thought you might.
I still have bed rest for about 20 minutes, 4 times a day at the moment. So, it's called an invisible illness, and probably nothing to say there's anything wrong with me as I talk now, but I spend a long time at the flat each day, conserving energy and recovering. So, that's my next step when I get home, and then I've got a long journey ahead of me to even think about when I'm going to return to work, and I don't think I'll ever return to competitive sport. The long-term damage I've caused is probably completely unrealistic, but I'm just delighted that I only really broke through the barrier of severe fatigue in January, which was almost 2.5 years. From that Monday I was describing, life was normal. Went into work that Monday, August 2018, and I sent an email to my fellow directors at work and said, I'm going to have to go home. I'm not feeling right. I've called the GP. And so August 2018 and through to December 2020, almost 2.5 years, and I wasn't there. It was basically wasn't taking any part in life. My family, my mum said to me recently, very recently, she's just realised how much she missed me because I wasn't there. So I'm just delighted that I can hold a conversation. Even in January, I couldn't hold more than a 25-minute conversation. So to be able to talk freely, it's amazing. Like, it's such a bonus, and like everything from now will be a bonus. You know, I'd steeled myself for the fact it might never get better. You know, there was no guarantee it was ever going to get better. So, yeah, it's good times. Even though obviously I'm nowhere near as healthy as most of the population, it feels good times at the moment. Yeah.
Good. No, I'm really pleased. And June, I'm really thankful for you giving up some of your time and your energy today to come and share your story with us and with the Isle of Man and further afield.
Yeah, no problem. And thanks for your patience and in listening to me waffle on.
No, not at all. The pleasure was mine. It's we have lots of different podcast guests coming and covering different topics, and this one in particular, it's quite poignant and it's very important and it's quite emotional, isn't it? And it's very, very serious, and I think it's important that we've got topics like this getting out there so people can really sort of get the benefit of your experiences.
Yeah, I'm glad we didn't have a camera on this. As I started welling up about halfway through. Yeah.
It's brilliant, mate. And I was just glad to be able to get you in for it. And I wish you all the luck and success with your ongoing recovery.
Yeah, cheers, Trev.
And are there any if anyone's having similar experiences to yourself, what would be your sort of the best advice you would give them initially?
Everyone's going to be different, so I wouldn't want to give one piece of advice to apply to everybody. You need to work out where you're at and pace yourself as best you can. I'm happy for people to get in touch with me. I'm obviously not back in work yet. I've got enough time in my hands to try and help people out where I can. There is lots of information out there about post-viral fatigue and how to manage it. Be a bit careful though, because there's some bad advice out there too. Right. So I guess my advice would be to get in contact with somebody who knows what they're talking about. Yeah. You know, whatever source that is, and tread carefully, doing your own research. But maybe I can. I'll give some thought to who's best to contact, and I can send you those details.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be amazing if there's some support groups could be looked into in the future, maybe, for people who are having similar experiences, because that's often a great way to sort of learn, isn't it, from those shared experiences? Yeah,
so there are a couple of support groups. There's a Facebook group for people with ME, and there's a Facebook group for COVID recovery. So they're there, and you can obviously find them if you look for them.
Are they local Isle of Man ones?
Yeah, Isle of Man ones. Yeah. As I say, you can learn a lot from people's experiences, but it's sometimes difficult to work out. Yeah. You know what applies, because they can be very different. If you can find somebody who knows what they're talking about, I'd say that's certainly the best way of getting advice that will apply to your situation. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Juan. And that's it for today, guys. We're going to be, if anyone's got any suggestions, any topics that they'd like to talk about on the Isle of Man Sport podcast, get in touch with me on trevor.christian@gov.im or give me a call on 688 555. Fingers crossed, we will be getting this out very shortly, and you should be listening to us in early May. And coming up in the future as well, we're back out of lockdown, so we've got a lot of courses taking place as well on the coaching perspective. So get onto the Isle of Man Sport Coach Network on Facebook, and you'll find out when dates for our next coach education program courses are. We've literally just finished our 10 webinar series with Sud America Coaching as well. Fingers crossed we might have some more webinars coming up in the near future, so watch this space on that, folks. So again, thank you, Jim, for your time today, and thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you again soon.